Welcome, everybody, to another thrilling episode of The Haunting Truth. So, imagine, if you will, being told you were safe, you were protected by local authorities, and you were assured by people you were told that you should trust. You were sheltered behind stone walls. You were supposed to be in the safest place in the territory, in a colony that welcomed the persecuted, displaced, and outcast. So, what could go wrong? Then, waking up before dawn, you hear the sound of horses, men with guns, axes, hatchets, and neighbors. So tonight's story isn't just about folklore, it's about a ghost story, and it's about history. And it is about the tragic tale of the massacre of the Conestoga Indians that has stained Lancaster, Pennsylvania for as long as this tale has been told, which unfortunately has not been that often. So
Yeah.
I am Jen, and this is my hostess with the mostest woo, and we are going to tell
Woohoo.
you the story of the massacre of the last of the Conestoga Indian tribe.
I'm really interested here because I have not heard of this, or if I have, I've forgotten it long, long ago from a history class a long, long time ago.
I've
Um,
actually never heard of this before, which was kind of
okay.
shocking to me since I've lived in the area my whole life and I've
Hmm.
heard about all the different tribes. I hear about the Lenni Lenape, the Algonquin, and I've heard about most tribes. Now, I've heard of Conestoga, but I just haven't heard of the Conestoga Indian tribe.
I was gonna say I've learned about the Lenape and the Algonquin, but yeah, I think I can only remember seeing a sign or like I want to picture like a glass vase or something that said Conestoga on it, but it
Yeah,
was
it
like
doesn't give
just a
you much context.
brand or something. Like it doesn't tell you anything. So this
Yeah.
will be good to learn something new tonight.
Now, there is obviously going to be a ton of listener discretion on this one. So,
Like
again,
the
this
hatchets and
episode,
axes didn't give it away.
yeah, didn't give it away. So, this is for entertainment purposes only. This does discuss racial violence, colonial murder and brutality, and the deaths of Indigenous men, women, and children. These events are important to American history. Listener discretion is advised, and some of the details are extremely disturbing. So, I just want to give everybody a good heads up on that one.
Mhm.
Now, as we said, most people haven't heard of this, but long before Pennsylvania existed, there was the Conestoga, who's also known as the Susquehannock, and they lived
Okay.
along the Susquehanna River. Now, they were traders, they were diplomats, they controlled trading between the interior tribes and the English along the Susquehanna in Pennsylvania and in Maryland. And they actually went as far down as the very tip of Virginia.
Oh wow.
They were warriors. They were known for having a tall stature and fierce courage. They also carried longbows and fought in controlled ranks under their chieftain Kennereget. So they were known for being very intense warriors and actually fought very similar to like Roman and British brigades.
I was
So
just
I
thinking
thought that
like
was
this is Sparta.
yes,
What a
it
throw.
very much so is reminiscent of it when I heard of that. In the 1640s, they battled the Powhatan, which are like in their northern territory, closer to New York, and they ended up clashing with the Maryland colonists over their territory in the south. So they were spread extremely thin in the 1640s because they were fighting in the north, and then the other part of the tribe was fighting in the south. So by the 1670s, they had skirmishes with the Iroquois Confederacy, and the spread of smallpox unfortunately decimated the Conestoga, who was once a very thriving tribe.
Mm.
Unfortunately, by 1675, the last of the Conestoga forts fell to Virginia's militia after Bacon's Rebellion. And we did
And
cover Bacon's
hmm
Rebellion. So if you haven't listened to that episode, please go ahead and have a listen. It'll tell you how much the colonists actually fought against the tribes and also fought against the English decision to have treaties with these tribes. So, regardless of what the English were saying, the colonists were going against it and decimating a lot of the tribes within the area. So, if you have an opportunity, please go back and listen. Now, by 1763, only about 20 Conestoga people remained. They lived peacefully on the land set aside for nearly till present day, which is kind of present day Millersville right now. Um, Many spoke English. They traded with settlers. They were Christians. And they believed that they belonged because they had been assimilating into English society for so long. They had English names as well as native names, which they used interchangeably. But unfortunately, the Conestoga would be very wrong in that assumption. Now, during the French and Indian War, it had left Pennsylvania really gripped by fear. And in the episode of the abduction of Mary Jemison, we saw firsthand how war impacted not only the frontier people, but the native people alike. And many colonists were abducted or murdered by the natives in the area, just like the Conestoga were fighting on their own encroachment as well. There was a lot of stolen land, interrupted traditions, and a loss of hunting grounds by the frontier people, leading to possible starvation of their whole tribes. And that's why a lot of them have resorted to fighting in the French and Indian War. Now, with the French and Indian War ending, there were a lot of treaties, and unfortunately, those treaties had been broken by the English. In this time, living native tribes were very unsatisfied. They were struggling to survive, which brings us to the Pontiac or Potomac, the Pontiac Wars. Now, the Pontiac Wars were known as Pontiac's Conspiracy or Pontiac's Rebellion, however you want to call it. And it was launched in 1763 by the Confederacy of Native Americans who were dissatisfied with British rule. And this was in the Great Lakes region following the French and Indian War. But a lot of that was spilling into Pennsylvania since we're so close in proximity to the Ohio Valley. And a lot of the tribes were spread out pretty far. Now, warriors from numerous nations joined in an effort to drive British soldiers, unfortunately, to drive the British soldiers and settlers out of their territory. Now, the war is named after the Odawa leader, Pontiac, and he was most prominent of many indigenous leaders in the conflict. Frontier settlers did suffer attacks in Pennsylvania, as I stated, during the French and Indian War, and also due to this war as well, which caused rumors to spread rapidly. Now, many colonists blamed all Native people, regardless of their involvement in the Pontiac Wars, which brought rise to vigilante groups from Paxton Township, who decided that justice belonged to their own hands. Now, this group of vigilantes went across Lancaster as well as Cumberland counties and formed in 1763 to defend themselves from indigenous attacks from the Pontiac Wars. They were known as the Paxton Boys, and they justified any kind of violence against the indigenous people by saying that they were colluding with other tribes to attack Pennsylvania frontier settlers. And they were extremely aggressive in their beliefs. They were also called the Paxton Rangers. Neither one of those things was true. They were actually not a militia. They were not rangers. They were just basically a group of vigilantes that were going and unfortunately massacring Native people.
Mm. Mm-mm-mm.
So on December 14th in 1763, approximately 50 armed men rode into Conestoga town, which is the village of Conestoga. Now, the Paxton Boys rode from Paxton County into Conestoga town, which was a plot of land given to the people by William Penn in 1701 with their treaty. Now, the winter in 1763 was a pretty harsh one. It was the coldest one in memory to the colonists. It snowed almost every single day, and this raid took a lot of time in preparation. Now, the Paxton Boys, is what they were called, or Rangers, rode along the Susquehanna for about a day in the snow before they stayed overnight at Wright's Ferry, which is present-day Columbia, Pennsylvania.
Okay.
And they did stay with other families there overnight in order to get the element of surprise the next morning. So this was very well orchestrated. They had to make sure they had places to stay, they had people to stay with, they had to organize to make sure that they got back together in the morning. They ended up regrouping before dawn on Turkey Hill, which was right along the Susquehanna. Now, the way that the town was situated, there was Susquehanna, then there was Conestoga town, and then the next stop was Lancaster City proper. So it was Conestoga town essentially was in the middle. So it was a really easy target because the only other direction that anybody would have would be to run towards Lancaster city proper. Now, unbeknownst to the Paxton Boys, there were only 7 Conestoga tribe members asleep in the village at the time.
Mm.
The rest of them had actually gone to do trading. They were known for making brooms, for making woven baskets, and the majority of the village was actually not there.
Mm.
Unfortunately, there still were 7 people there at the time. And so the Paxton Boys opened fire on the huts, and it was right before dawn. So nobody was awake. They went into the huts, they tomahawked any survivors, and then proceeded to scalp them.
Mm.
And then they took the scalps and toys from the 2 boys who were killed, hung them on the back of their horses, and then rode off into the snow and then set fire to the huts.
Yeah,
So
sound like pleasant people.
yeah, I just can't imagine thinking that that's an okay thing to do.
Mm.
Now, several witnesses knew who these had to have known who the Paxton Boys were because they stopped back at Wright's Ferry, where they stayed with the Barber family so that they could rest and eat. And they were witness to the fact that there were scalps and native toys on the back of the horses of
Ugh.
these gentlemen. I'm going to call gentlemen in air quotes at this point.
Yep. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, the Conestoga people were murdered, and there was one survivor, and it was a young boy. After he had been hiding, and so after they had burned the houses and destroyed the property, he actually fled to the remaining tribal members to go find them and make sure that they did not come back to the village for a while to make sure that there was nobody that was trying to like basically hunt them down.
Mm.
So he was able to link back up with the rest of the remaining villagers, which were about 14 people.
Mhm.
And they came back to the huts and found that it was definitely in ruins. Interestingly enough, they were able to go back and find the Treaty of William Penn, which guaranteed their safety. And
Oh,
they also were
okay.
able to go to Lancaster and let everybody know what happened, which immediately the Lancaster officials, after being made aware, took swift action and relocated their surviving 14 Conestoga people to the Lancaster workhouse for protection, which had just been finished.
Hmm.
So, oddly enough, there was this workhouse that they had just built in Lancaster, and it was right behind the jail. So, it was situated where the jail is on, I believe, Water Street, and that is where the back door of this workhouse is,
Okay.
and what is today called Water Street, and the front door was on Prince Street. So basically, it backed right up to where the jail was. So basically, it shared a yard with the jailhouse.
Okay.
So it was supposed to be the safest location for the remaining native people from this tribe.
Okay.
Now, the government was like, you're going to be safe here. There's the jailhouse. Here's the workhouse. It just got finished. There is still like, they had, a heated stove. And so that they would be able to survive the winter there and everything else. So they thought that they were going to be safe. Um, there were 7 adults and 7 children that remained within the tribe. Now, when it came to this location, it did also make them feel better that the local magistrate looked like he was taking a lot of actions to keep them safe.
Hmm.
He actually rode up to northern part of Lancaster County to try to intercept the Paxton Boys because he heard that they were trying to come back to finish off the rest of the tribe. He also had several guards walk Prince Street and Water Street day and night to try to protect the tribe. And there was also 200 British soldiers stationed in Lancaster at the time that these attacks had happened. So actively, there was over 250 active military, British soldiers, Scottish Special Forces soldiers, as well as the local magistrate and his forces that were in Lancaster at this time in this area because it was at the center of town.
Mm.
So you would think that they would be pretty safe.
Yeah, you would think, and I like to hear that they were like actively trying to protect them. And, that's odd. Most of the time they're not usually that proactive in trying to keep them safe.
Yeah, to
So,
try to keep them safe because
hmm.
this massacre happened on December 14th, 1763. Now, interestingly enough, on December 27th, 2 days after Christmas, the Reverend Thomas Barton, his schedule, and he was a very famous reverend. He had 3 different churches that were spread out across the county. So what he did is every single day, so he had a church service scheduled on Christmas, one scheduled on the 26th, and then one scheduled on the 27th. Now, you would think that because Reverend Paxton is stationed, or Reverend Barton is stationed in Lancaster, he would have had the church service in Lancaster on that day. No, he decided to have it some in one of his other churches. So he scheduled the Christmas Mass, where all the magistrate, all of the politicians, a future signer of the Declaration of Independence known as George Ross, as well as the elected mayor of the town, were all going to be attending this 2 p.m. Christmas Mass on December 27th, which was widely communicated throughout the community.
Uh-oh.
Yeah. So all of high society was going to be there. So after the church service starts at St. James Church, which is still there today, lo and behold, the Paxton Boys decide that they're going to show up. They show up around 2:01, like clockwork. They know exactly what time this church service is starting. They decide to park there was 50 to 100 men assembled. They parked all of their horses outside of the White Swan Tavern, which was oddly enough owned by the coroner on Queen Street. They then decided that now this is the middle of the day. All of these people are working. This is a huge merchant row on King Street where they're parking all of their horses. They are armed to the teeth with tomahawks, knives, machetes, and flintlock. And they
Nothing
march
suspicious going
down
on there.
and you have to go down King Street and then across Prince Street in order to get to this location. So they basically are circling the center block in the middle of Lancaster proper to get to this location.
Okay.
And nobody says a word.
Yeah. It seems a little odd.
It is very odd. So according to the records, the coroner and the sheriff were actually at the workhouse that day. Now, there were 50 to 100 men, so they just stepped aside. They're like, there's 2 of us. What are we really going to do about this?
Yeah.
They ended up going through the front and the back doors, and they unfortunately massacred the remaining tribal members within minutes.
Poor people.
And then they went back up the street after they were done, completely covered in blood. And they proceeded to circle the block and hoop and holler on their horses and set off their firearms at least 3 times while circling the block.
Ugh.
Extremely proud of what they had done.
I'm feeling ill, actually.
Yeah. Yeah, I am too. When I was reading this, I was like, this is absolutely disgusting.
Yeah.
Now, and I'm going to get into a very graphic piece of this. This is the only first-hand account that has actually survived as a record of the massacre. And it was told about 60 years after the event happened. So take it with what you will. At the time, William Henry Jr. was 6 years old when he saw this. So apparently he went with his parents as well as some others, and they went to the jail. And he went near the back door of the prison, and he said there laid an old esteemed Indian and his squaw. Now, everybody knew who he was, and he was considered to have a very friendly nature and had formed many friendships over the community for several years. And his name was William Sock. Across him and his squaw were 2 small children, the ages of 3 or 4 years old. Their heads were bashed in with tomahawks, and they had been scalped.
Oh my God.
Now, in the middle of the jail yard, there laid a very stout Indian. He had been shot in the breast. His hands and feet had been chopped off. He had been tomahawked, and his head had been, unfortunately, blown off and splashed several feet around his body due to a gunshot wound.
Oh my Lord.
He said that the rest of the women and children were shot, scalped, and unfortunately cut into pieces that laid around the prison yard. That
Oh,
is the only firsthand account that still exists of the massacre.
ugh. I don't,
Now, yeah, I was just like physically ill even thinking about how you could do
mhm.
that.
Yeah, I don't understand the depths that people can go
I
to
do, I
and
don't
then be
understand
proud
it
of it.
either. Yeah, and being extremely proud of it on top of it. Like it's so heart-wrenching to even think about a whole community just standing aside. And you didn't
Hmm.
think this could get worse, but it does unfortunately get worse.
Oh,
So
wonderful.
now messengers were dispatched immediately. They burst into the church service that was going on at St. James Cathedral or St. James Church, and they let them know about the massacre at the workhouse. And the Paxton Rangers somehow made it out of town after going past the church to exit the town without anybody seeming to notice. They didn't have any hoods on. They didn't have their identities were not concealed in any way, shape, or form. And
Uh,
nobody was arrested. Nobody was brought to justice for this whatsoever.
that doesn't surprise me.
Now, interestingly enough, there were some founding fathers who actually really heavily spoke out about this. But before I read to you what exactly this founding father said and what he did afterwards, I'm going to tell you about the reason why I have such high suspicions about what happened in this scenario. And it's all
Okay.
based on a podcast that I was listening to, so might be a little biased by the research that I did.
Okay.
On December 28th, according to Halbrick Rudolph Russmeer, who is the minister of the Arabian Church, he witnessed the burial of the 14 tribe members.
Uh,
And he said that the sheriff took all the bodies and buried them next to the Mennonite cemetery because they were not, but mind you, these were Christians. So they had converted and they
mhm.
refused to bury them in a cemetery.
Oh.
Yeah. He stated that they ended up piling the bodies in a cart. They dug a very large pit. Hundreds of people showed up to watch the event, and they started to just throw the bodies one on top of each other. He said that they buried them no better than a dog without even a blanket or anything to cover them by.
No.
The bystanders were yelling insults at them and stated they are as they should be, and stated they got what was coming to them.
Ew.
Now, mind you, about half of the tribe members were children.
Yeah. I don't I don't like this story.
Yeah, so far it is extremely sickening.
Yep.
Now, in 1833, railway workers claimed to have excavated Indian bones near the location of the burial site, and they ended up reburying them supposedly. But nobody has ever been able to find that location.
Okay.
So we're not sure where they were reburied at.
Well,
Now, yeah.
mm, okay.
Now, Benjamin Franklin had something to say about this. He heard about the massacre and he was horrified, as were many other colonists. And he
Mhm.
was the loudest voice in in his condemnation of what had happened here. He described this killing as barbaric. He argued that if the murder of innocent people couldn't be justified by fear, nobody was truly safe. And why were they not brought to justice? Despite
Mhm.
public outrage, as I said, the Paxton Boys escaped punishment. They even tried to go to Philadelphia to massacre another Indian tribe,
Oh
or
my
native
Lord.
tribe, I should say, that had been protected. But Benjamin Franklin did show up with about 600 soldiers and stopped them.
Good old Ben.
Yeah. So they tried to sneak into Philadelphia, unfortunately, to end another tribe. And he was like, that's not going to happen here. So
Wow.
now, on a good side of this, even though there doesn't seem like there's a huge silver lining, not
Hmm.
all of the Conestoga, as I said, they traveled a lot, they migrated a lot. Not all of the Conestoga tribe perished. They might have actually killed all the remaining members of the Conestoga town, but in 1845, surviving members of the Conestoga tribe who had married into different tribes, mostly the Oneida and the Shoshone,
Hmm.
the tradition is that the children of the mother would then take on that specific tribe. So a lot of the fathers who were Conestoga still had surviving children because they did not live in Conestoga town.
Ah, okay.
Yes. So they actually ended up petitioning to get their land back based on the treaty by William Penn. But unfortunately, by that time, the part of the treaty had stipulated that only the Conestoga people, who were considered as part of that only that tribe,
Hmm.
could gain the land back. They could not have assimilated into any other tribes. So
Oh,
unfortunately, it was ruled that they could not have their tribal land back.
look at the lawyers finding loopholes everywhere.
I know. It was, but
Jeez.
it was good to know that the Conestoga people did not all perish,
Yeah.
and that these unsavory people who were just despicable human beings that I could say way more colorful things about,
Hmm.
they were not able to actually massacre the whole tribe. There is still Conestoga people. There is, or you know, they're still out there. The tribe is still extremely active. There, when I was listening to the podcast, there was actually somebody who was Conestoga that was telling about the lineage and how all this came about and how they still ended up being able to survive. And they do, even though a lot of them are part Shoshone or Oneida, they still consider themselves to adhere to all the Conestoga traditions.
That's very cool not to see a complete extinction.
Yeah,
Um, yeah. I'm
yeah,
glad.
it was
Glad there were some
very,
survivors
very
there.
scary.
Hmm.
So I don't know if there's a silver lining for this one, except for survival. So if anybody takes any away from this specific episode is just to understand that being a witness to something doesn't make you culpable for the actions of the people around you. Sometimes you do have to be the evidence and you do have to be the witness at the end of the day, because if you just stand aside like everybody else, horrible things happen. We've seen this
Yeah.
throughout history. Now, on an interesting note, the location of the jailhouse and workhouse is actually part of Fulton Theatre today. And
Oh,
there is
wow.
still a wall in Fulton Theatre that has bullet holes from the massacre.
Oh, wow.
And so you can go there and see it. There is supposedly hauntings that happen on a pretty regular basis. People do report seeing native people sitting in the seats
Hmm.
of the Fulton Theatre.
I
They
hope they
also
like the
hear
show.
phantom footsteps, shadow figures, and they feel like people are watching them.
Wow. I'm gonna check out Fulton Theater. That's pretty neat. I'd like to see that history.
It's beautiful. It is
Yeah.
definitely beautiful inside. So at the end of the day, if you ever, some spirits you might have thought that you have dismissed a whole entire tribe, but they live on. They're very resilient and they always come back. And you never know exactly who they're haunting or where they're going to be, but they keep on bringing back the reality of what happened to them so that they're always remembered.
Good. I'm glad they do. And I hope they keep on coming back because we can't afford as a people to forget um,
No,
those.
especially something like this.
Yeah, yeah. We need to be reminded.
Yeah. I think a lot of people they say if you forget history, you're going to repeat it, and I don't
Yeah.
ever want to repeat something like this. So, in closing, everybody, so if you like this episode, please like, subscribe. Please make sure that you drop us a note, give us a comment, let us know what you thought of this episode. I know personally this episode is very near and dear to my heart. If you guys have not listened to previous episode, my stepdad that raised me was Native, so I would never imagine in a million years if somebody hurt my family how heart wrenching it would be if something happened to them like this. So that's why we do try to bring up history, mystery, unsolved crimes, and just things that make you think about one, what you're doing in life, and also two, what things are out there, what things are haunted, what things go bump in the night, and maybe the reason why they're haunted, not just because like, oh, maybe there was a ghost that no, like what is the history actually behind this person? Where did they come from and how did they end up in this situation? So we like to give a little bit of light and brevity and humanity to some of the things that people just find mysterious and spooky. So we appreciate you listening as always. And I have a very special ghostess with the mostest right now, my Woo, and she is going to sign us off.
Yeah, so thank you for walking us through that. I'm going to have to make Fulton Theater a stop in some of my future travels. And my apologies to everybody that if you've missed my face, my camera decided to take a dump halfway through. So we'll be back on later. I don't want to make Jen have to redo all that. So thank you for sticking with us for this long. I appreciate it. And you will hear from us next week. And I'm not quite sure what our episode next week is going to be, so I can't even give you a teaser at this point. But it'll it'll be there and
It'll
it'll
be
be fun
good.
and it'll be interesting. So come back.
All right. See you next
All
week,
right.
everybody.
Yes. See you next week. Bye.
All right. Bye.